more relevant as you were putting it. I was saying to Honorable Dagan, it's challenging the budget. But the truth is that indeed, if there's any worry also is about how that technology, if care is not given, can alter even what you think is the real will of the people. Right. So I think it's something to look at. There was something raised about Australia as I put my mic down. It's an engagement Australia had. I think that's the department presenting it, and possibly looking at Parliament regulating. But at the end, the recommendation was self-regulation. I think for me it's important to also say how they arrived at that point, looking at the conditions and whether we do not have similar conditions here. And as I'm saying, the limitation though is that we didn't spend time on the successes of that intervention of the directive. So that if at the end, as we go back and put a report and make a recommendation, say whether indeed self-regulation under these conditions has worked elsewhere, and then these are the results that they are getting, right? Because if others pull out even on voluntary binding institutions, because then there can be legal enforcement, you already see that there is a problem. Because if for everything we have to create a legal framework that must have enforcers and so on, it does not only talk to budget, but it also talks to the skills that you require to keep within the institutions in a competitive environment. I know the regulator has been suffering from the same facilitator, that it gets to be a breeding ground for other people to take people. So the SABC may have suffered from the same over time, that you will make sure that those skills are there, but the competition is something else out there, and people would leave. And therefore you may want to look at how you work with the other players. And that's why I'm saying you are limiting us when you don't give us a sense of the successes, or if there are failures out of that process, that then we know that may not be the route to take. Thank you, President.
No, Facilitator, I'm not a media person. I'm not good in this area. Therefore, Munare, I'm making a disclaimer. Whatever I'm saying, you will understand that is a very easy man. But two issues that I want to raise. Firstly, I'm not sure whether there's any country in the world that is able to control the human endeavor in the fullest sense and cultural appropriation of individuals. Precisely because we have our own lived experience. And then what you think, in fact, in Limpopo, Mtagati, in other areas, they may not be seen that way. I'm saying that there are different lived experience of the individual and other people on that. Because if you are not careful about all the issues, we may end up, in fact, by default, encouraging dictators to be much happier when we are not happy with the views of the ordinary people and they express their views unfiltered. Unfiltered. I'm not sure what is that program. I've never seen it, but I think it's a very important unfiltered. It's not censored by anyone. Because if we don't do it that way, it would be very easy to have, in fact, I don't know any other country in the world anyway that can completely control the society that is advanced a society that is developing, let alone that anyway, are not a homogeneous society. Maybe one or two countries in the world that are homogeneity. There's no homogeneous society. And then what informs us is our lived experience. Based on our lived experience, we'll articulate it the way we have lived it, not the way other person has experienced and lived it. And therefore, the state getting involved in such a way, I think, would be very problematic. My view would be that a self-regulatory approach would be far easier than, I think, Mlala making a law about Twitter. I'm not sure Twitter is now is X, whatever. I don't know what is happening, but there are a lot of things that are changing general. But the influence, because it's difficult, I think, with facilitator to regulate the progress and civilization of society. It's very difficult because they reach a stage where they simply fractured because of the civilization itself. And I'm not sure how you're going to manage it in a manner that will assist us to ensure that what you think is a perspective, is a factual perspective, may not be a factual perspective to me. Maybe Mnare, but not for me. Therefore, the diversity of thought in society always encouraged, given the fact that the Supreme Law encouraged that. But how do you then persuade individuals? In fact, I listened to Alan Marx anyway, saying that no, all this thing of regulation is just something that is there to frustrate people, control people, and manage them. How do we balance it in such a way that is not seen as something that allows those detectors in Niger and other areas to simply deny people information in terms through the social media, whilst at the same time, we don't want also social media that promote hatred, promote many other things that are contrary to the values of society. Because I would have thought that it's only when the values of society are almost accommodated by every citizen where you are able to self-regulate. A society that is very divided like in a society, I'm not sure where do you start. But I think learned colleagues will assist us really to address some of those issues. I wanted just to make that comment only because those who are very good in this area of work, they will assist us. But it's a political society. South Africa is a political society. That's why we are a nation, we're a political society. As a political society, will always deal on ideological issues. Then it will be very difficult, I think, for Mnare. I'm not sure what is my ideological thing as I move on, and then you start regulating how it should be articulated, how you manage it. I think it's a difficult thing, really, to do that. And I just guess that if there is a country that is successful in doing that, maybe you will assist us anyway to say this is a country that is not homogeneous, it's not Japan, it's not China, the other countries that are almost like us, with so many nationalities and approaches and live experience that is different. Because based on that, they will be able to have common values. Beside the constitutional values, but there should be common values in society. Because the only thing that restricts individuals is rules and values of the society. Without it, I don't think it's easy to make laws. Otherwise, I'm told that these phones anyway, are more advanced now than ever before. Therefore, whatever you put as a law, people they simply go and bypass it. And then use, in fact, they bypass it in such a way that even legal enforcers or law enforcers, they will never really arrest them. Because people simply bypass every law that is there. Because technology is more advanced, I think, now than the legal system that we are setting in place. And to me, that is the challenge that I think we are facing. But I think facilitator and the team will assist us to identify some of the areas. The chairperson may also decide to go and see some of those countries that are successful in managing all this. Not even, in fact, the most advanced industrial areas that are managing the social media responses. They are complaining as we are complaining too. But what do you do? Because a democratic society
Thank you very much for that intervention. I think there's a hand at the back. If you can just please introduce yourself and indicate the organization that you're coming from.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Tandy Smith. I'm from Media Monitoring Africa. We are making a presentation tomorrow, so I'll keep my comments short. I understand we'll go into this in a bit more detail when we do make our presentation. I just wanted to comment on some of the input that we've heard thus far and the comments from the floor. We seem to have solutions to this issue during COVID because we were working together. We had a multi-stakeholder solution to a complex problem, and it came together in a really extraordinary way, one that we hadn't seen before. So I think it's just pointing out that sort of multi-stakeholder solution to that problem. Another reason why we saw the response being effective was because it was about the time it took to respond to the issues. It was responding to disinformation, was around countering the disinformation, and that brings me to the next point, in that overregulation of this issue is not the solution. We already have a number of different policies and laws in place that regulate conduct and speech online. We have our constitution as a guiding document that balances freedom of expression with its limitations, and to introduce further regulations of this complex problem is not going to do any favors. And we really need to stay away from over-regulation from the state on disinformation. And the reason I say that is because we know that disinformation thrives because it often contains elements of truth. So we don't police truth, we don't police thought, we don't criminalize lying. What we do want to target is the incitement to violence, the hate speech, the cause for public harm that comes intertwined in disinformation. And I think that should be the focus. Counter narratives, as I said, and digital literacy programs. I can't emphasize that enough. We need to be focusing on solutions to inform and educate, work on digital literacy, get these initiatives into school curriculums, work on looking at how we empower ordinary people, empower the public to understand these issues. In just looking at elections, we've got solutions to this. We run a platform called Real 411, which will be unpacked tomorrow as well. We're working with the IEC over elections to report disinformation. So I think I agree with some of the other inputs in that we need to be looking at solutions, but a lot of the solutions are there. It's about collaboration, it's about working as multi-stakeholder groups in supporting these different initiatives. And it's about supporting transparency, accountability, and again, responding with accurate counter information to this. We are not going to win if we focus on how do we over-regulate the space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for all those inputs that have been made. Okay, I wanted to close the list, but I see a hand. If you can be brief so that, okay, I also see, yeah.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, Honorable Chair, honorable members. My name is Nomonde Konega Soba. I'm more in the advocacy, ICT, and regulatory space. I guess all of us gathered here this morning, we are very much alive to the fact that the 2024 elections are not going to be just any ordinary elections. And I think we should commend the Electoral Committee for putting together this symposium just to get us ready and prepared to make sure that next year's elections basically uphold the integrity that they most deserve. So, Chairperson and members of Parliament, we know that misinformation, disinformation, or even propaganda is nothing new. What is new is how today it has been massified and it has been given legs by social media platforms. And also the challenge of how do we moderate a platform, for example, that would have 3 billion users at a go. I think Ms. Mapoitu's presentation, she made an inference to a research that has been undertaken. It is almost humanly impossible to moderate this kind of information that is coming out from the platforms. So the question then becomes, what becomes our solution? And this therefore calls for collaborations. How do we hold hands and work together across all sectors, with government, with platform owners, and all society concerned? In the absence of law, what do we do? Some, I think in one of the presentations, they call for self-regulation, which has got its own limitations. But the question is for me, or maybe what I'd like to really put forward is, we have an important and a missing gap in this particular space to say, how do we make sure that the users of these platforms are educated about being really informed online safety? And I can never underemphasize the importance of the investment in capital letters to make sure that how much effort is being put out there for digital literacy engagements. And another point that was put forward, it was AI as an intervention. We also need to be mindful of the fact that AI also has got its own biases. When we bring it closer to home, we also need to be mindful of the issues of AI and our own indigenous languages, and also some of these dialects that are taking place. And maybe in closing, Chairperson, is that I think we just need to push for collaborative efforts to make sure that every player is on board. Maybe I just want to also use, maybe referring to a point that was also raised by MMA, is that in my previous era, when I was heading one of the, as head of policy and regulation in one of the platforms, we worked very closely with the IEC, also including the MMA, where they talked about the real 411 platforms, where there is a takedown of this content that might be misleading. The question then also again says, but we also need more investment in making sure that all South African citizens are aware of these particular platforms, so that should you pick up any of this information that is due to be fake news or misinforming or even disinformation, it can be reported to this platform so that it can also be taken down. And thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I think there was also a hand from Honorable Gumbu. Yeah.
Thank you, Facilitator. I guess one thing I'm interested in, and let me also thank the presentations made. That's one thing on SABC. In his presentation, Mr. Mshekwe raised the issue, I think it's a very, very important issue of the abuse of news editors by those in-authority positions. I think we need to discuss this issue and come up with proposals on how we can handle this matter if that is pending. Because it's going to have an impact, a very bad impact, on the content of the news which we are broadcasting. broadcasting as a public broadcaster. I think at this meeting we need to discuss and come up with proposals or sort of recommendations on this one. That was the recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If you allow me to just close the intervention from here, we are still going to continue to have this discussion when we have other presenters after tea break. But what I'm going to request is Honorable Mulala has protected you. He said you don't have to respond to each and everything now. We have today and tomorrow to discuss these issues as a collective. So you don't have to respond to each and everything now. So I will only just allow you to just have an observation for 2 minutes each. 2 minutes. Thank you. Let's start with the department.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think in principle we agree with the inputs that have been made, and I think some of them are quite specific in terms of us giving further information in terms of where successes have been. But the point that I want to raise, Chair, is that in the research that we've done, given the fact that this is a fairly new issue, if you look at, for an example, at the EU, they are only going to implement their code of practice against disinformation only in August 2023, as well as in Australia, I think it was only in 2019 where they come up with those mandatory codes on misinformation and disinformation. So as I'm saying, it's quite a fairly new issue, and I think we are willing to provide more information later, Chair, where we can be able to track in terms of, if you look at Australia, 2019 to 2023, what has been the successes and what has been the failures. We are willing to be able to provide that information. But in the main, Chair, I agree with most of the speakers that collaboration, civic education, digital literacy is quite key because it takes pressure of us to provide resources, for moderation and the likes. So, yeah, in the main, that would be my response, Chair. Thank you very much. But I think, Chair, sorry, as the last point, the white paper on audio content services and online content safety does deal with some of these issues that are being raised here. But I think the other point that they've raised is that policy making takes time. What do we need to do before we conclude that process? Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you for that. Maybe you can also respond to the issue to say, during COVID-19, we were able to come up with a policy direction. And it directed all these licensees, OTTs, and internet service provider to say, do not distribute fake news. I know that at that particular time, it is because we have acknowledged that we had a common enemy. That's the reason why we're working as a collective. And even now, when we move forward, we need to have that acknowledgement that we are having the common enemy, which is the fake news, disinformation, and misinformation. If we accept, then we can have a coherent approach moving forward. But if you can just briefly comment on that issue, to say, is that an approach that can be considered in the current setup?
Chair, you're really putting me on the spot.
Okay. So then if you need time to consider it, then it is
I would
fine.
need to consult,
Yeah.
Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, so then let's go to ICASA briefly. They are saying, why are you not regulating OTTs? Among others. But if you need time also, it is fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Program Director. I think I'm going to regurgitate the answer that was provided earlier to say we are not regulating them because currently we do not have jurisdiction, you know, and we await finalization of the draft white paper, as my colleague there has indicated, which we presume and hope will pave the way forward in regards to regulation of the OTTs by the authority if, you know, the paper so deems. So I can end there, Chair. But just to highlight briefly that I think we concur with the MMA, Nomonde, and all the speakers that have indicated their dire need for stakeholders to collaborate, you know, in an effort to, you know, to curb misinformation and disinformation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ikasa. SABC?
Thanks very much, Chair. Look, in principle, I agree with Tandy that over-regulations will not solve anything, especially if you think about disinformation and misinformation. They thrive on anonymity, in a sense that you are unable to actually know who spread this. So it's more about the weaknesses in our self-regulatory controls, the weaknesses in our internal controls. Those are the things that we need to focus on. Just to give you an example, you know, the kind of the code that the Press Council and the BCCSA came up with years ago does not take into consideration the development that are posing these challenges. And lastly, I think I would want to steal some ideas about being proactive in terms of our messaging. I'm going to steal your idea. And to say, as SABC News, towards elections, we need concerted campaigns on all our platforms against fake news. And I will collaborate with my colleagues in making sure that it's a campaign that we really need to say, by the way, be careful, be aware, be vigilant about what is going on out there. So I will take up that challenge in terms of being proactive. But lastly, just to reiterate what I said this morning, is the fact that as media organizations, we can have all manner of tools and all manner of regulations and codes, but if we don't have that connection, that trust with our audience and people who are consuming this information, then we are really fighting a losing battle. And it's an appeal to all my colleagues in the media organization to say we need to accept the fact that the decline in audience who are coming to us and going to some sites and some platforms, it's also an indictment on us to say what is it that we have done that our content is not so appealing, in a sense that we need to reconnect. And also I agree with you to say, look, I think I've highlighted in my first two slides to say content moderation has got its own unintended consequences, and we need to be careful that it can lead to censorship, it can lead to gatekeeping, it can lead to other things. So we need to really keep that balance. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you for those observations. Can we please appreciate them? We will now go for the tea break. I will propose we come back at 12:40. 22:01, and then just maybe for people to be able to stretch their legs, maybe, and then we will come back and have the presentation by the FPB, IEC, and Research ICT Africa. So 12:40, we are back here. Thank you. Colleagues, let's get seated so that we can start. I will presenters from FPB, IEC, and Research Africa, Research ICT Africa, to come to the stage. Do we have someone from the IEC? I don't see anyone coming. Do we have someone from Research ICT Africa? I don't see anyone coming. So we'll give this opportunity to FPB to take us through their presentation. You are welcome, Dr. Uluka. The podium is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Honorable members of the Portfolio Committee, colleagues within the sector, as well as those coming from the ICT sector. We are the Film and Publication Board and the Content Regulatory Authority of South Africa. But perhaps what I thought, in view of the discussions that happened, I thought as a start we should kind of share with the colleagues who are we as the Film and Publication Board. I know most of the people associate the FP board with censorship as well as just children protection. I think we are going to share with you today who we are in terms of the expanded mandate given to us by the Film and Publication Amendment Act, which came into operation last year on the 1st of March, and that's what we are operating. This is our second year of implementing the Act. I think this slide is very important because it explains who we are, that we are a regulator, statutory content regulator in terms of the Film and Publication Amendment Act of 1996, and therefore we exist to protect the public against what is defined in the Act as harmful and prohibited content. And I think the reason why I want to emphasize this is because they are relevant to the discussions that we are having today, especially the questions around whether South Africa has got legislations or regulatory instruments or entities to regulate misinformation or disinformation. Now, in terms of the Act, those are the definition. I think if you think about the Act, it says, or it defines harmful as means causing emotional, psychological, moral distress to a person, whether it be through film, game, or publication, through any or offline medium, including through the internet. Harm has the corresponding meaning. Now, the second definition is the prohibited content, which is defined as content which abounds to propaganda for war, incitement of imminent violence, advocacy of hatred that is based on an identifiable group characteristic that constitutes incitement to cause harm as prohibited in the Film and Publication Act, Section 16.2, 16.4, and 18.3. So throughout, whatever that we do at FPB, we are governed by these two operative definitions, whether the content is harmful or is prohibited in terms of the sections. I think I'll get to that. In other words, if it's prohibited because it can cause or it can incite violence, hate speech, or it can cause harm to members of the public. Now, pursuant to our mandate, we regulate the creation, production, possession, distribution of films, games, and certain publication by one, classifying and regulating the classification of films, games, and certain publications. And I think the second one is very important, whether in South Africa there's anyone who has jurisdiction over the online platforms, is that as the FPB, we are the only entity, statutory entity, that register online distributors of adult content on all platforms, including digital platforms, to ensure that they comply with the Act, and regulate online distribution of films, games, certain publications, and relating to harmful and prohibited content. For that purpose, what you also do is that we protect children against what you call children sexually abusive material, as well as children sexually exploitative material, that, and we also operate the hotline. And that's what you also do. And this is expansive mandate in the sense that if you go to other parts of the world, you can have a classification authority, whether you go to the UK, a statutory classification authority that stands on its own, you got a hotline that stands on its own, and you got an online safety regulator that stands on its own. But in South Africa, this is what we do. That's the job that we do as the FPB. And the reason why I want to emphasize bullet point 3 is in the sense that recently we have seen a case relating to Mr. Ackerman. Now, what you have in other jurisdictions, including Europe, is that when they see materials that are harmful to children, they report to the hotline, and the hotline will pass the matter to the police. The police will investigate, take the matter to court. At FPB, in South Africa, that's the opposite. In other words, even the police come to the FPB for their materials that which have been reported to them to be analyzed. We analyze, we appear in court, we give evidence. That's why the case around Ackerman, who received 3 life sentences, because of the amount of the work that the FPB team has done, over 2,000 videos that were analyzed by the FPB team. So that is to emphasize the nature of the expansive mandate that we have. And we also conduct online safety and public education on online harms. So the issue of misinformation, as I'll explain later, is within the FPB's mandate. So, but I'll explain that. And then what are the regulatory powers that we have as the FPB in terms of the Act? Because that which we do is that which is provided for in the Act, and nothing more or nothing less. Now, what we do as part of those regulatory powers, the likes of Google, the likes of Meta, the likes of TikTok, they register with us to operate in South Africa and pay an applicable fee. And we also grant exemptions. In certain instances, we say you don't have to pay anything, or we exempt certain conditions. The other part, which is quite important in terms of Section 31(3) of the Act, is that we determine what is harmful and disturbing in terms of the schedule. In other words, in terms of the definition that have been provided. We issue also legal notices to online content distributors and internet service providers regarding, 1, the protection of the public against harmful and prohibited content, and through the enforcement committee, chaired by a retired judge, we issue sanction penalties for non-compliance. In other words, if we realize that a particular operator, whether it's Google, and I'm using Google because they are here with us today, or TikTok, we realize that they don't comply with certain things, we take them to the enforcement committee, who will write to them as a warning at first, or sometimes making certain requests. If they don't, then we submit the request to the enforcement committee for sanctions. And then we also enforce general compliance with the provisions of the Act. And we've got the online monitoring team and the compliance officers. I think for us, this is very important in the sense that even though you use technology, you still need the human element to moderate content, because technology will never give you cultural nuances. You need the human element to do that, especially in South Africa. Like, I think when you talk about nudes, which is what we also regulate. If you come to South Africa, being naked from our own tradition, may not be considered as illegal because of the nature of the type. But if you go to other countries, the mere fact that a person's breast is exposed or whatever can be considered as illegal or harmful. And then we also conduct public education awareness regarding content classification and online safety. That's what we do as the FPB. Now, I provided these slides so that all of us sitting here can understand what is happening throughout the world. this is how online content is regulated internationally. South Africa, as you can see, is at the bottom. You will never find regulation that says misinformation or disinformation, but we regulate the impact. You can see a lot from the European Union. South Africa is here. What is it that we regulate? Pornography, obviously. Violence, in other words, incitement of violence, in other words, content that promotes or incite violence. Hate speech, we regulate. And also bullying and harassment. This is what you call generally online harms. You got all the countries that are there. But one thing that you never see throughout, there's no one who's regulating or who will say we are specifically regulating misinformation, disinformation, because we regulate the impact. And that's why I think I'm saying this is the powers that we have as the FPB. Now, this is misinformation, disinformation. I think the program director tried to provide some definition. The important thing is misinformation, like he said, sometimes it's what you call, it's not deliberate. In other words, sometimes, and I think that's what happens, I receive an online message, or whether it's a video, whatever, then I pass it to my colleagues, not knowing, without verifying the facts. That's why we say it's not deliberate. But disinformation on that is very, very deliberate. And during elections, I think we are going to see a lot of that, especially when the various political powers are jostling for voters' attention. There will be all these negative comments or conspiracy theories or unethical or whatever that they call it to make sure that they receive the attention. I think that's what's going to happen. And I think that's why we have to be very vigilant. As the FPB, this is a major test, simply because this is the first elections where we are being tested around this prohibited content. In other words, hate speech, misinformation, and so forth. This is the first time, and like I'm saying, it's a major. It's going to be a major test. Now, there's one thing, and that's where we talk technology, and I think that's what you are going to see. What you call deep fakes, because this is an outcome of what you call artificial intelligence, where your picture, Honorable Chair, the way that you look can just be taken, be put on something else. Instead, they even put it on pornography and say, hey, there's the chair of portfolio committee. And then guess what? And when people look at through the naked eye, no one can make that distinction at all. And I think this is a major, major problem that we are going to face. In certain instances, I think politicians, I always say, it's a very tough job. Because someone can just say, put you on a picture receiving a black bag full of money and say, hey, he's corrupt. And then in the minds of the public, and then it becomes a stigma attached to you. So I think for us, these are some of the things that we are dealing with as the FPB, what you call generative algorithms. In other words, and this is where we need to regulate, and I think we'll make recommendations later that in South Africa, and that's where I agree with colleagues around the inadequacy of the policy. You don't have the policy on artificial intelligence. In other words, responsible use or ethical use. And most of the countries are moving towards that. So that people understand that you don't just use technology to present others in a negative light. Because when that happens, the way that is done is that it has got implications in terms of shaping public opinion. Think about it. I don't know how many of you have seen it. If you go on Google, I'm using Google quite a lot. If you consume certain kind of content, I like consuming content on aviation. And I realize that every day I've got notification on the new aircrafts that are being launched by various. So, but where is this coming from? So, if the public also are going to be exposing a lot of that, being exposed to that, this kind of content that are being fed on a daily basis doesn't give them the right to choose. And we are saying that in the build-up to elections, and I think you'll see, it's going to be distributed via the internet, social media, and then it has got the potential and can be weaponized to propaganda for war, incitement for violence. And I think this is very, very important. This is not only for the elections. All of us, as South Africans, still remember the riots of 2021. And if you want to see the impact of disinformation, you should go back to that, how disinformation was used to fuel those kind of violence. Because certain people were just posting. Whether the videos on Twitter or whatever were relevant to South Africa, no, it doesn't matter. They were just posting. Fire, any building that was on fire, they would say, we are watching you, or there was a word that was used, KZN or something like KZN, we are with you, something of that sort, to say we are supporting. So that was actually an incitement of violence. And also the spread of hate, which is based on characteristics of people. I think, I don't know how many of you have followed Elon Musk in his tweet for TED with Julius Malema. He keeps on saying, no, South Africa where it is, we are pushing for genocide. Yeah. And that's now all of a sudden, South Africa is a country that we managed to go ourselves through the transition. All of a sudden, there's genocide happening in South Africa. And that's the message that is spreading out there. And guess what? He's the owner of Twitter. And he even for a few days blocked the accounts of various people that probably were not subscribing to his ideas. Now, the reason why I'm saying FPB has got the jurisdiction over the online space is because of this section, Section 18H of the Act, which prohibits the distribution of any medium, including the internet, social media, or any film, game, publication that promotes propaganda for war, incitement for violence, advocacy, or hatred based on identifiable group characteristics, and that constitute incitement to cause harm. So anything that we do at the FPB, we given powers by this section. Anything that we do around online or online space is because of this section. And for that, when you define what is prohibited, because these are prohibited in terms of the FPB Act. And I think for me that's very, very important. Because it's misinformation, it has got the ability or the potential, like you said, Chair, a program director, that propaganda for war, like someone mentioned Rwanda, I think it was Mr. Monari who mentioned Rwanda, it can cause imminent violence and can cause hatred. And if you look at Twitter, a lot of it's actually a hate platform. And therefore, based on this and based on this section and how you look at what are the things that make the misinformation, disinformation be at FPB, is because of this key element, and also the fact that it's being distributed online, which is our space in South Africa. Now, the other issue, we always think of misinformation, disinformation as social or political tool or exercise or activity. No, it is financial as well. In other words, you will see during the elections, there are websites that will be mushrooming, whose job is to get as much advertising as possible, just around elections related, whatever. They will even take some ballot papers that were taken from the recent Zimbabwean elections and put them there and say, hey, we found 10,000 ballot boxes abandoned in Jukskei River. The idea is to make sure that the elections are not credible, especially when people realize, political parties realize that, hey, I'm just about to lose. We are just about to lose these elections. Because as we go towards the elections, every political party is very confident. I still remember one political party in Purple, they said, no, I'm going to surprise many people. I'm going to be the president. And then when they realized that, hey, the elections, that those screens are changing, people said, no, these things are not fair, free and fair. No, we have been whatever. So the moment they start feeling that way, what happens? You have got pictures taken, whether from Rwanda or wherever. Say these are the ballot boxes that have been counted, and a lot of them are in a particular party stronghold. So that's the idea. The idea is to make sure that the integrity of the elections are questioned, and that's what disinformation. There's an NGO that we work with on disinformation called Global Disinformation Index, based in the UK. It's a non-profit organization. They do a lot of work, even on South Africa as well. The last time that they did work on South Africa and disinformation was in 2021, just before the riot in July. And I think they did an excellent work in terms of showing where we are. And they are saying that, I think this is very important, that just in the US alone, ad-funded and monetized disinformation generates $42 million US. So you can think the amount of money. Now the situation has changed. And that time you can imagine it was during COVID. What about now when the industry are on rebound and advertising increasing? So we are likely to see that. So this revenue is generated through partnerships. In other words, even they are supported by the big role players as well. So we need to also to investigate. I think as the FPB, that's one of those things that we're going to do. The revenue that is generated through disinformation, because there's a lot, I think it's very clear to see what is that they're supporting. Now, at FPB, content moderation comprises 3 forms. Like I said, classification, and then we also monitor and take downs. In certain instances, we can through our own content moderators. In others, and I think we have been getting a lot of cooperation from some of the operators, except TikTok. What they do is, if we say to them, we have seen this kind of content circulating online, we require that content is not complying with the FPB Act, please remove it. They do that. And I think one of them, I don't know, in the build-up to the shutdown, there was a content that was a video that was being distributed that went viral. People were threatening kids about that if they go to school, this is what happened. And we requested the platform owners to remove it, and they did. And we just one letter, and they do that. That's the level of cooperation. That's why we say this environment doesn't require one regulator. All of us have to work together with industry. And they did that. And sometimes we say, take them down, and they do. And as the FPB, that's the team that deals with content moderation. You can see you've got compliance monitors, you've got classifiers, quality assurance to bring the human element to this exercise of content moderation. But the key issue, and I think I'm going to put a spin to it, balancing content moderation with freedom of expression. I think earlier people talk about the need to protect the freedom of expression. And I think if you talk that language, big techs will love that because they capitalize on that. It means, no, you're not going to regulate them at all. And I think I want to say, go throughout the world, you can see, even a country that never wanted the regulation of the online space, the US. Now they're moving. If you look at their discussions on Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act, they are actually in the discussions on that. So what we do as the FPB, we don't regulate user-generated content unless it is likely to cause one of those things, harm, hate speech, or is talking about children. Then we can remove it. So for any prohibited content, to balance the expression of interest, what we do is we don't just act voluntarily. We wait for a public complaint to be laid because we want it to be a censorship board. Once a complaint is laid in accordance with the procedures that we have published as the FPB, then that's when we act. And sometimes I think the disadvantage of that, it means we can't be proactive. We have to wait for a public complaint to be laid. And like I'm saying, I think that's the disadvantage of that part, that on prohibited content, except where it involves children, then we don't act until a public complaint has been laid. Just to give a classic example, you recall the video, it wasn't actual pictures, nude pictures of one of the South Africans based in the Free State, the nude pictures. The reason why we request that they be removed with immediate effect was because of the impact on the children. Where it matters on the children, we don't have to go through a process. We block it quite quickly, and then even the operators know. But on sensitive or objective matters like your hate speech and so forth, we wait for a public complaint to be laid, then we do the investigations. And I think what I also want to say that in the quest of implementing this act, we work quite well with the internet service providers. I think a lot of them, you can see, even if you go on their website, what they do. Like the moment we say, remove this content, they do that. And I think even some of the industries, they work quite closely with us in terms of regulating the space. So there isn't, except those few that are always problematic, and Twitter is one of those. And then what other activities, Chair, is there's a global digital report that has been released that South Africans are the biggest internet addicts in the world. I think some colleagues referred to that. And elections are going to heighten that. We are actually surpassing even the developed world. We are always on social media platforms. So, and social media is becoming the biggest news sources, especially amongst the youth and the South Africans. Therefore, they are, I think they are susceptible to harmful and prohibited content, especially as we build up to the elections or fake news. Now, this is a report that's very important to say why are South Africans addicted as per the report. You can see Number 3 is staying up to date with news and events. South Africans are so political animals. We love to know what's happening with politics. Actually, if you want to see political consciousness, come to South Africa. Go to the US, you ask them, where is Congo? Or if you say I'm from South Africa, they will tell you, no, oh, I've got friends in Tanzania. You say, but Tanzania and South Africa are far apart. They say, but no, it's one the same. So I think because South Africa, we are very politically aware, we always looking for news information. I think that's what explains that as well. Now, there's, like I said, there's a good report that was done on South Africa around digital, global disinformation on the month, in 2021. The report reveals the following, which is very critical, that South Africa has got a diverse media and a sizable advertising market. Therefore, in terms of ad-funded disinformation, that is ripe for that. You may not necessarily find the same level of disinformation in a country where there's no advertising at all, because people see that as an opportunity. And then that news consumption is predominantly dominated by your internet. People using smartphones. All of us, once in a while, you go through the internet to see what are the latest news. That's how we, very rare we still wait for the 7 o'clock to watch the news. No, we no longer do that. But half of the sites that were presented or that were sampled, they present minimum levels of disinformation risk. However, there are those that are there. And then those are that are more influential. And the unfortunate part is that they present key amongst others in Afrikaans. And that's the nature of the report. It said they present in Afrikaans. What do? They take advantage of the racial tensions in South Africa at times. And that's how they thrive on it. So that's what is the issue. But the key issue that we must also consider is that 2019 and 2020, Mr. Monari, is that there is low trust in by the public on South African traditional media. I think that probably the audience numbers that I can is an example of that your news are no longer attracting as many people as they used to do because of the trust. And I think if you want to undermine or underestimate the importance of disinformation, I think it comes from there that it is the biggest threat to human rights, in the sense that it fuels hate, and you know what happens with hate, like people always mention about Rwanda. And during election, I think that's still going to happen. The ability to undermine the democratic process, like everywhere, I think the US have showed that example. But one of the things that we've also picked up is that for disinformation, especially as you build up to the elections, two set or categories of people are going to be the biggest victims: women, whether as politicians and as journalists. I think very, very key. It's quite understandable when Boloka is a politician, but when it's a woman, I think it's something else. The kind of misinformation and disinformation that comes out of it is totally different from the way that they will treat or direct it at men. So we need to work together as regulators and so forth. So because misinformation is not deliberate, what it requires is education, in other words, public awareness. And for that purpose, as the FPB, we want to raise awareness. We have recently released, what do you call them, the peer-to-peer sharing of, peer-to-peer video sharing. The reason why we release that is so that they can guide the members of the public as to when we share content, make sure that it doesn't amount to hate speech, it's not harmful, it protects children and so forth. I think some of us know about the video that was recently distributed around a mother, I think, who was molesting the child. So, yes, it's a nice thing to share, but the impact that it has, you are not supposed to do that. So that's why we are doing that. It's part of the education. And we recently published industry code for the online operators, because there's no code for the online operators, except for the ISPs. Where there's that regulatory gap, you have to fill in the gap. But where there's something, you try to build on that which exists. And this is part of a core regulatory mechanism. And then we also issued guidelines in line with section 31.3 that explains or determines what is harmful as allowed by the Act. And some of the activities that we have are the ones that we have listed here as we build towards the elections, that in an attempt to protect our women journalists as they cover elections, I think the need to raise awareness on gender-based violence directed at them. The 16 days of activism will still do that. And then the prevention of, I think that's the workshop that we want to do in Cape Town in collaboration with our partners on online gender-based abuse and violence against female politicians. I think we think this is how we can also educate the public on this. And as we said, I think this is very important for the FPB. We'll also issue notices, because you've got the powers to do that, to every operator to say, how are you going to protect the public against misinformation, disinformation during elections? And I think the information that we receive, I think they will give us the plans. Based on the plans, we'll decide what are the regulatory interventions required. Now, Section 24G of the Act even provides the maximum fines that we can provide, or that we can impose as the FPB for a person distributing knowingly information relating to prohibited speech. It says not exceeding 150,000. But I think this is the dangers, and I think as the DCDT is going through legislative amendments, members of the parliament, I think these are the dangers of putting the exact amounts in the law. Because think about this, the FP Amendment Act was done 2019. Now think about someone from US, what is 150,000? It's nothing. Or even to Twitter, what is 150,000? It's nothing. And they always tell us, I think some of them, that no, we'll review you, whatever penalties that we issue, we'll pay it, but we won't comply. It's because there's a certain amount of power that they know you don't have. And therefore, this penalty is not a deterrent to that. So what we are saying is, when you pass this legislation, be flexible on the penalties to allow us more scope to impose more. In other countries like, I think, UK and Australia, what they do, even France as well, France is a perfect example. They will even penalize them. The maximum fee that they'll do is on the annual turnover of that particular company. Think about Google, you say annual turnover for that year. Sorry, Ms. Michelle, that I'm using you as an example. And then you have to think about that they dominate also. They transact in dollars, not in rands. But think about South Africa. One day maybe we'll be dealing with kwachas in South Africa. So think about it. Kwachas, even if you say 2 billion, trust me, these guys will love you. Because you need to bring a wheelbarrow for 100,000. So I think these are some of the challenges that, as policymakers, Honorable Gumbu, please think about them. How do we make sure that the enforcement that we put in are in line with the international trends? 150 is nothing. So we are going to do that and issue the notices to the distributor to say, what is it that you are doing around misinformation? We also have got the public complaint system, which allows that members of the public, when they see misinformation or disinformation, they can lay a complaint with us, we'll investigate, and we'll deal with the matter. So I think, in conclusion, no country is immune from disinformation and misinformation. And South Africa is even worse, given our past. And I think COVID-19 has shown the impact of that in terms of life, health. And the 2021 riots showed us the impact of that in terms of the ability or the potential of disinformation to cause, to incite violence. So a lot of websites will be coming in during elections, but we need to be ready. So as the FPB, we are not working alone, like I said, both nationally and global, because we are dealing with a borderless problem here. And throughout the world, whether you like in Australia, UK, Europe, whatever, you deal with the same companies or same operators. So we are trying to harmonize at global level some sort of compliance standards that these guys, irrespective of where they run to, they know that these things are the same. But for us, they need to balance this, everything that we do with the freedom of expression that is enshrined in our constitution. But what we want is algorithmic accountability, Ms. Mashele, transparency, and as well as responsibility reporting, so that I think we can protect the South African public. We are first and foremost citizens before we operate for these companies. And also very important is that we have established what you call the Digital Regulators Forum, which comprises Film and Publication Board, ICASA, Information Regulator, and the Financial Service Conduct Authority. So together we are working to ensure that we deal with this sector in a collaborative manner. And hopefully in the build-up to elections, we'll try to look at ways in which we can forge partnership with the IEC regarding disinformation and misinformation. And then the other thing that I want to say as a final word is that South Africa, we need to update our legislations, we need to update our policies on this space so that we can regulate the sector better. At least for now, Section 18H that I've mentioned is adequate to enable us to do that which we need to do. But there are other bigger issues that as a country must deal with around the online space. For now, that section enables us to, and it can, even in the build-up to elections, make sure that there are certain actions that we can take as a country moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for that. You know, it's not easy for doctors to be brief, but I think his presentation was what we needed to hear. Let's now welcome Mr. Mawetu Musri from the IEC, and they will then take us through their perspective on this subject. Thank you. Museri, thank you.
This is yours now.
Thank you, moderator of the session. Is it good afternoon to Chair of the Portfolio Committee and members, ladies and gentlemen. The mandate of the Electoral Commission is to deliver free and fair elections. That's our primary mandate. But we also have a secondary mandate constitutionally that is to create a climate conducive for free and fair elections to take place. And it is that secondary mandate that places us in the space where we have to deal with social media, digital media, and all other ills of society that affects the delivery of a free and a fair election. And our activism in this space is in line with that particular mandate. Now, our mandate is not intended to regulate the space. It is to work with the space to ensure that we do end up with an acceptable election outcome, an election outcome that creates legitimacy of those who are elected, an outcome that has integrity. And to that extent, even the integrity of the election management body is important and requires attention. Now, I thought, Chair, I might start by saying elections 2024 time frame is as follows. The current term of office for all our 9 provincial legislatures and the National Parliament ends on or about the 18th of May 2024. It's a 5-year term constitutionally, and the Constitution says to us we have 90 days to deliver an election from the end of term, which means if you do a quick calculation, by the 15th of August next year, we would have delivered an election and we would have delivered and declared elected those members of those 10 legislative houses of this country to the nation. Now, if you look at that, it therefore means if you take the latest possible date of election, which is 15 August, we are 11 months to that election. But if you take the earliest date possible for that election to take place, we are actually 9 months of election period. So we are indeed, as a country, now in an election period. Campaigns are on in various forms, and ourselves as the Commission, we are starting to send messages that are saying we are ready, we're preparing for this election. And one of those things we've done is to announce the registration weekend, which is 18 and 19 November. And we've said we will also have a second registration weekend, which we will give a date once we know where the president is likely to go with the election date, who is the authority of proclaiming the election date, and so are the 9 premiers. So, but they cannot proclaim a date without consulting the Electoral Commission. And we can confirm that that consultative process has begun. So hopefully very soon the country will have an idea of where the election date is likely to be. And building up from registration, we have candidate nomination between February and mid-March, after which it's the final election campaign period, which is April, May. And if we go for an early election, it's really end of March and the end of April, that 8 weeks period for the final campaigns. So part of the matters we are discussing today must fit within this time frame. And it starts to become clear that the best we could do is really to look for more cooperation and cooperation. And correctly, as the chair of the Portfolio Committee said earlier on, the likelihood of policy in the next 9 months is now impossible. You can only do a report for the 7th Parliament to go and implement. Now, there are a few changes for these elections that I must also share because they are going to be the source of disinformation and misinformation. The first one was disinformation of 2019. If you recall, it was a frenzy about double voting in 2019. I think there was a journalist in Mpumalanga who confirmed that they've actually voted for the second time, and there were few cases in KwaZulu-Natal and I think one in the Western Cape. Safe to say the actual police investigation found no truth of double voting. The convicted individuals were convicted of attempt to come and vote for the second time. Now, we've amended the provision with Parliament that provided that opportunity, which is a provision of special vote that wherever you present yourself as a citizen, you could basically vote. We've now said that has to be done by pre-application. So we are forced, as we manage disinformation, to change the framework, to change policy, and also change how we manage the actual election process itself. The second change that is very significant for this election is with regards candidate nomination and voter registration, enhancing the positiveness of the digital space, where we are saying you can now lodge your candidates as a political party online without having to go to any of our offices. That convenience for political parties is quite huge. And the second is for voters to say all along, because of fearing political fraud or election fraud, we've said present yourself in person. We've now relaxed that environment because of the availability of technologies to say you can register online and provide sufficient authentication online and be on the voters' roll. So as we debate in this space, there are positive elements that we need to enhance. There are negative elements that we need to manage. The third one is the popular one, which is the amendment in the electoral system, allowing the independents to contest the election. That also brings something that is of importance for civic education and these platforms, which is the 3 ballot papers that we'll have for the first time in 2024. And given the interest and the number of political parties on our register currently, we have over 340 registered political parties. If you add there a few independents, you run a risk of a very huge ballot paper, which is why then there's a criteria that must be met to contest an election. That's why we need a deposit. That's why we need signatures to just sift those who've registered parties, but they are not sure they want to be political parties. So the sifter for our democracy, because we have a very liberal democratic environment, is then to pay that deposit and have the signatures. It should be noted that signatures are required from political parties as well. Those that are not in parliament right now must bring signatures. The 14 that are in parliament don't have to bring signatures because their last voter support attests to some voter support that they have. Now, signatures will sift the 340. If we end up with what we had last election, which is 48 political parties who contested last election, we are still okay. But if you add another 10 independents, the ballot paper changes shape. It becomes a double column ballot paper. Now we've got to protect information. Now this is where it becomes tricky for us and yourselves and the industry, that you can only mark for one political party with the 2 columns that you have of a ballot paper. So there will be parties on this right hand. Basically, I'm saying the ballot paper is now a poster, divided in the middle to have 48 parties this side and another 48 this side. So we've got to communicate that and do education on that. But it is room for misinforming people, for disinforming people, and we have to be always guarded on how we handle that bit when we get there. You will have to mark for one. If there are more than 96 parties contesting and independent candidates, we are going into a booklet. So let's be ready for all possibilities, and it's the new environment. The last bit on just this quick update on the election is to say today we are in court. That's why probably if you saw me disappearing, I've got to catch up with where the arguments are. Three things were taken to court on this new law. First one is signatures. They are saying there are too many because the quota that is asked for signatures must be lowered. The second issue they've taken to court is that the national legislature should not be divided in terms of 200 regional seats and 200 national compensatory seats. it should be 350 and 50. So that's the argument in court today. And they've said something to the court, the applicants, which is a bit awkward. It can really throw our electoral democracy out, that if the court doesn't find 350-50 acceptable, the court must then make all 400 regional seats, which is problematic in terms of remedies before court. The third issue they have taken to court is that when a vacancy from a seat of an independent after the elections becomes vacant, that seat must be given to the next highest ranking independent. And the court is faced with that. The argument there is that, remember that as a country we've not amended our constitution in as far as the electoral system. Our electoral system still remains proportional representation. And therefore, the seat distribution and allocation must still result in general proportionality. So all of these aspects, we'll hope the court makes a decision soon, and we can get going with preparing for the elections. Now, the electoral system we have and the 3 ballots, it's certainly not new in the country. For those outside of metros in local government, they have experienced this system. So it won't be new, except that the ballot paper and the description of how it works is going to be the challenge. Now, Chair, definitions have been dealt with. Let me just focus on the aspects of what we are doing as the Electoral Commission in this space. I think the third bullet here is quite key, that the use of social media in the country has deep penetration. Almost 43 million people are users of the internet and other digital platforms in one way or the other. So it is an area that we cannot ignore. It is platforms that we cannot ignore. And if you break down the users in terms of gender, our women still lead, but there's a general balance there. And the key component of the last bullet, in our view, is that young people are the main users of these digital platforms and social media. And therefore, if we want to reach your new voters in the country, we've got to go into these platforms and harness them. We've just listed the whole number of platforms available for. Now, our approach as the Electoral Commission is in these blocks. Block 1, we've seen the opportunity from these digital platforms and social media to educate, to inform, and to just increase awareness about elections, electoral process, and to the extent that we could do that on these platforms, let's do so. And together with them, we can manage that agenda. The second key block for us is obviously managing the negatives in the space. Now, from everything mentioned this morning, let's not overlook intimidation, bullying in these digital platforms, particularly in the space of election. And because it happens also at a domestic environment, we need to look at that. Obviously, my colleague who came before me mentioned the focus on women bullying and intimidation in election space using these particular platforms. We have also found that they are good platforms to continue with engagement with voters, with stakeholders and citizens, and we need to harness and use that. The difficulty that we have not mentioned this morning is the majority of South African citizens who say accessibility of these platforms, although in your hands, but paying for data to connect is a big deal. And as long as the providers of connectivity cannot zero rate certain areas, particularly the area of voter education and elections, it remains a difficulty for them to access. We are also very clear that our messaging on these platforms is to promote participation. You know, when there's freedom of choice in an environment, there are those who choose not to participate and those who decide to campaign against participation. And we've got to be strong with our messaging promoting participation. The experience of 2021 was a difficult one in terms of voter turnout. It's an interest of all of us in the country to look at how we promote voter turnout in the next general election. This last election, we dipped below 50%. We are at 47%. But it's not outside of the trend of the last 3 general elections. The trend has dipped from 80% participation to below 66% participation. So we are on a downward trend in terms of voter turnout and voter participation. Now, when we walked into the space of social media and digital media, we were learning as we go. We are not experts on it, and every election we learned new things. And our close association with platform providers assisted us to learn new terminologies and new possibilities. And amongst the things we are now doing to deal with disinformation is to use this kind of approach where we are monitoring what is posted, but also we are listening to what is being posted and picking up all the negative things and dealing with those in our approach to dealing with and combating disinformation and misinformation. Obviously, daily monitoring with social and monitoring tools, we do that. The key for us has been to respond as soon as it is practicable. And thirdly, to go onto these platforms and share the correct information. So we've picked up something negative, let's go share the correct information and put it out there. The partnership with the digital and social media providers has given us a lot of muscle, but I will deal with it in how and what it can do for us. It cannot cover everything, but it can help us deal with this space. We have partnered with NGOs and civil society. Real 411 is a direct partnership with the Electoral Commission and Media Monitoring Africa. Our colleagues from MMA will present the details of that tomorrow. And one important work we do in the space of combating disinformation and misinformation is continuous dialogue with political parties at our national party liaison committees, as well as at our provincial party liaison committees. And the focus here is premised on saying disinformation, to a large extent in elections, emanates or is instigated by key political role players. It has never been an ordinary citizen who says bad things about the commission or about election management or about the outcome of the election. It has always been a political party leader. There's a particular political party that always doubted the commission can do something. But when they win and we announce the results, we say, can we take your seats away because you don't trust the commission? He says, no, my seats are mine. So we do have a challenge with party leaders, and that's why we spend a considerable time with them as a means to prevent disinformation. But you know, when my colleague said, when they know they are going to lose, they don't care anyway. They will say the bad things. Now, our space is compounded by the introduction of independent candidates. One, they don't have the political party ethics, values to guide them in their campaigns. They are always going to be thinking as they go and post and do whatever. And that's the challenge we will all face, is how to regulate these political players who are individuals, who are guided by their own feeling and view of the world at that point in time. Now, let me deal with the framework we have with the platforms. And we are indeed grateful to them and MMA that we've moved to say, let's document what we agree to cooperate on. And our cooperation is not a solution. It is a platform, a mechanism to assist to deal with disinformation. The trick here, ladies and gentlemen, is that we can only deal with disinformation and misinformation when it has occurred. So it's more about somebody has posted a ballot box being thrown out there, and we say, yeah, that's not true. It's old video, or it's self-created video. By the time it has circulated to millions of people, it comes to our attention, it has done the damage, but it is how quickly in this platform and this framework, once we bring it to their attention, they make an intervention, whether with a takedown or a suspension, whatever the options that they have. But the framework also acknowledges that these platforms have their own governance policies, and we want to encourage them to implement those and implement them speedily in order that we can deal with disinformation around the elections. There's, however, the Electoral Code. It has its limitation, the Electoral Code of Conduct. It has its limitation in that it comes into effect on proclamation of the election. So with the campaigning that is happening now, we can't effectively use the Electoral Code of Conduct. As much as we can use its sentiments, its intended impact, but we can't hold political parties accountable for that. So this cooperation is going to just extend our arm to make timeous interventions, not only against the Commission, but also against other citizens. What we learned and became aware of is that even for the platforms, they can never know what you're going to post in the next 5 minutes. And all they can do is to react to what you have posted and ask you to take it down, or they take it down for you. So when you consider policy frameworks, considerable burden on platforms, we need as a country to be careful that we don't overburden the platforms, because it is the users who are posting. So this cultural, educational approach we suggested earlier on seems to be a key thing. Build social cohesion in such a way that we are not prone to posting negative things and incorrect things to cause digital harm and harm in a broad sense of society. Now, At an African continental level, we've been doing some work as South Africa around disinformation on elections. We are currently the secretariat of a technical working group to develop guidelines and principles to be on social media and digital platforms' impact on elections. And we are quite advanced because the AU has looked at adopting these guidelines. The African Association of Electoral Authorities is the key body that will adopt these guidelines, and all electoral commissions in Africa are members of AAEA. And as the secretariat there, that document is now available, and we're taking it for a final consultation at the AU headquarters next week, and we will make that available also to the people participating in this session, just to see what are some of the proposals and the basis of the proposals we are making. It is in regard to social media, digital platforms, and elections. It doesn't extend itself like the UNESCO guidelines, which are broader than just elections, but all aspects of these new platforms that we have. Now, my last two slides, moderator of the session, deal with opportunities and challenges. And I think maybe all said and done, the third bullet here is very key. It relates to where I said most of disinformation on elections is initiated, and it comes from the political role players in the competition of this election to office. Now, going forward, we are going to be presenting to the country these guidelines I referred to in Africa, and we are going to ask the country whether there is need to domesticate those guidelines for elections on social media in South Africa. Now, domesticating it would consider whether there is regulations or there is a legal framework that enforces the compliance with those. But even with that in place, if we cannot change the behavior of people on these platforms, we won't win the battle. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. You heard it, it's a behavioral issue. And the instigators, I like that word, the peddlers, I won't say it, but the honorable members have said it. Okay, then let's open the floor so that we can have questions, inputs, observation. Can we have that roving mic, please? A roving mic. I have noted Honorable Majosi. Can we have another hand? Honorable Mthembu. Honorable Mudakane. Mudakane. My apologies. I am guilty as charged. Do we have any other hand at the back? Yes, there's also another hand there. I think let's start with Honorable Majosi.
Yes. No, thank you again, moderator. And also let us welcome the two presentations that we've received. Mine would not necessarily be questions, but I think you have raised more concerns in terms of film and publication, and also on the IEC. But on this issue of fines, and I was, because I could see that you are lobbying us in terms of maybe raising the money. It shouldn't be 150,000, but maybe more. But also, I don't know, maybe I would lobby other members as well to say, can't it be fine and instead of being fine or? Because once you say fine or imprisonment, a person has an option to pay the fine and not go to prison. But once you say fine and imprisonment, then you know either or, whether you pay that fine or not, but you're still going to face that, because we must take into consideration that whatever it is that is publicized impacts on an individual at that present moment. And people commit suicide because of things that are publicized on without their consent, and you find that your pictures are there, whether it's news or not, but you find that now they've dealt with your reputation as well as a person. And we come from families, we've got background, we've got communities. How do you face those people after that? So it raised a lot of concerns that then it's inhumane for a person maybe to do that. But also, I think it boils down to what has been raised, that we must work together. You must work with GCIS and so forth, and SAPC to publicize also that it is wrong to do so, because then you create a problem of people committing suicide. Maybe even if we have an advert that would play for even 15 seconds or so, that will take out that message so that people know all the time that they can be dealing with such. And also, but one question I wanted to know, do you get more complaints? Do you get complaints more often in the FPP? People complaining that what has been publicized, it's not true, and so forth. And in terms of the IEC, as well, I wouldn't have questions, but I think you are raising fundamental issues and points that we should look at as politicians sitting here. Because, in fact, in terms of voter education, you know, it's a big issue that a person would opt for not going to vote. Because that also will eliminate this 340 registered, because people see an opportunity when a large number of people do not go out and vote and think they can grab on those who did not vote and run with whatever nonsensical things that they do, because these political parties that are created now is no longer about change or whatever change they want, but it's about how will they make money, how will they be becoming kingmakers and making sure that they are leaders in some sort or what, because you see people opening up a lot of things and you think, but how then do we regulate that? I'm not sure. Maybe we must at some point sit down and come up with a way. I can see the signatures, they can win, some of them, but not most of them. But I think in the Constitution itself, maybe we need to, Honorable Mulala, that's where we need to focus more in the Constitution on how then do we change, so that democracy is controlled, man, it's managed. We must manage democracy. You can't just be a willy-nilly of a country, because we'll end up having 600 organizations that would register. Then we'll no longer have a booklet. I don't know what is it that we will. Yeah, so yeah, I think those are the main things that I've focused on, and it's upon us as well as political parties to go out and do voter education so that people will go out and vote because they know what is it that they want to vote for. It's just that for now maybe they are still angry at us for not doing some other things. But yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mine actually is not a question. I just want to check. Somebody told me that if there is something written on Facebook that thing is tarnishing your image, that cannot be removable. I'm just checking whether is it true that you cannot remove that something on your name or written on Facebook. The second one is for the IEC. It's my appeal to the IEC that they must make sure that their officials, they guard against aligning themselves official or openly with the certain parties. Thank you.
No, thank you, facilitator. I want just to make two comments. One is the publication. I'm not sure how much you are engaging with the rural society. Because as you know anyway, that what is happening now in our country, most people who are being trafficked are from the rural setup. The pornography is happening now in Homestead. It's no longer really in Alexander and other towns, right, in rural areas. I'm not sure how do you link with those poor people there, given the fact that large number of those who are highly aware of what is happening, they're in urban areas, not in rural areas. Therefore, rural areas become centers of these thugs to traffic and also to do a lot of pornographic filming. I think we must try. I know that resources would never be sufficient for any organization under the sun, but I just think we should consider that also. Linking up, I think we can identify many areas in some provinces where the real harm is being done by people like the one that you said was sentenced for 3 life sentences, Ockerman and other people. Because the people also are committing some of this crime, some of them are well respected anyway. And they are able then to attract these young, poor, broadly speaking, African women in rural areas who are victims of the same thing like this. Let alone anyway that they're also being recruited by their own people who are in urban areas, go and recruit them in rural areas and do all the harm. I think that we are trying to fight. One way or another, I think the traditional leadership and the rural organizations, I think we must engage with them. Because many of us, because we are located in urban areas, I'm not sure if Alexander is an urban area or not, but we are located there. We tend to be very biased towards the urban setup rather than the real victim of some of the issues. Because even at the election side, cited from the IEC, you will know the intimidation that happened in rural areas is much bigger than the intimidation that happens in urban areas. The rural areas, but the poor, women in particular, they are really always being intimidated even in election time. what I always find it a little bit difficult is that then the observers, general, they don't go to those rural areas. They come to us in Alexandra. We won't intimidate anyone anyway in Alexandra. But people who are being intimidated, some of this intimidation can be very discernible. You can see it. But some of this intimidation are very sophisticated. Therefore, I think we must work it out with all organizations. Again, I think already we are working with people in many areas, in rural areas, but I think we must enhance it. Because also I realize that in rural areas, particularly around those who are part of the area next to the ocean, intimidation is much higher. And therefore, someone we call people do it willingly, they're not really. It's precisely because they're scared and then they're intimidated. I think a free and fair election simply means also we should limit the degree of intimidation in whatever form. Some is a psychological intimidation, some is just really thug. Sometimes the royal families and royalty is also getting involved in this. To me, I think we must address it generally with the rural organization, because many of them are very active. But I don't think we work with them in a manner that assists them also to understand the real problem that we are facing. I think if we can do that, it can assist us a lot, hopefully, because you know the leadership that always cause havoc. I think you know them now. 30 years down the line, surely you know who's going to complain about the fairness of election. Surely there should be a way where you meet with them. I'm not saying I'm not talking about the party liaison officers. The real leaders of this organization, I think we must be systematic in this, because the more people realize that the elections are not winnable, the likelihood to damage the image of the IEC is going to be multiple. Therefore, it's going to be attacked by everyone. But you know already, in fact, I can guess, I think Mlala will agree with me. I know already who's going to complain about the outcome of elections. And you yourself also, you know, but I don't think you engage them in a manner that assists to expose them. Because if you don't do that, you're allowing thuggery to grow in our country towards election. Because the only thing that holds us together as South Africans is a democratic election. Once the credibility of election is damaged, for whatever reason, by leaders, then we'll be in the worst situation than we are. And I think we must address it to one way or another. I think we are doing well, but I think we can still, there's a room for improvement. Also with publication and yourself, if we can work systematically and engage people and organizations in society. Because it's important that we do that. They see election as their lifeblood. And I guess that all Democrats, they know that election is our lifeblood. Without those elections, we are nothing. And therefore, it's important for us to work together with all those organizations. Those are comments that I wanted just to make, that meet with these guys. It happen to be men anyway, not females who are doing this, are men. Meet with these guys and on time, just again, to assist them, to understand the damage that they are causing for the election when they go, knowing that even their own election, what we call observers or party observers there, they will tell them that, no, in this ward, you got only one vote. But they go and say there are 20 votes that are missing. And we know them. I think we must be able to talk to them, because elections are around the corner. And it's very important, given the social media that we're talking about, the danger of disinformation that is there already. And I think we can work out very well on that. Members of Parliament, the least that we can do is what we've done already, laws and everything are in place. And then I think need to be implemented accordingly and assist in that situation. That would be my comment, General. I think, broadly speaking, I think I agree with some of the issues that you raised.
Okay, I think there's a last hand from Angie.
Peter. My name is Abongile Mashele. I am with Google South Africa. Thank you so much to the Portfolio Committee for convening the session. I think one thing that's clear from the conversations that everyone's having is that defining misinformation is very difficult. But one of the advantages we have in our country is that limitations in our in expression of any kind is very regulated. So if we're talking about defamation of character, for instance, we have instruments in the country that will assist us to define or deal with a conflict when there are defamatory statements that are made. And those include the courts of law, hate speech, etc., etc. So I think it's important for us to harness those, to focus on those, and also identify the impact of political speech. Because especially during election time, a particular politician will hear another opposition party politician saying, political party X, they will express a political opinion, and then does that then become defamatory, misinformation or disinformation? And I think we also need to lean on the codes of conduct that we have. So the IEC has one, for instance, that outlines how politicians should conduct and work around those issues. So I think it's important for us to lean in on those, to harness those and focus on those, especially when we engage with our political parties and throughout the political organization, starting from a branch level all the way up to Parliament. Secondly, I wanted to just, I wouldn't want misinformation to be perpetrated here. Some of the comments that were made, I think a lot of the platforms will actually present tomorrow. There's been a lot of progress that has been made by the various platforms to deal with ensuring that we safeguard the platforms and we do not allow them to be used to spread misinformation. And digital advertising is one of those because that's central to the business of these platforms, of the platforms. So we want consumers who can trust that when they see an advert on Google search, on YouTube, it is true. There have been long-standing instruments that are there to make sure that advertising is not used to perpetuate information that is not true. And it is particularly so for political advertising. And I think you'll pick up from the engagements we'll have tomorrow that a lot of the platforms actually have political ads policies where we identify who has placed the ads, where are they located, how much have they spent, so that there is that level of transparency that is there. So we'd like that to be also included. So from an advertising perspective, I wouldn't say there's a big issue. The bigger issue is user-generated content, particularly of political players, because political players want to use the platform to reach as many people and gain favor. So we need to work with the political players, and if we can start with Parliament, that would be great, to see how can we make sure that there is responsible utilization of the platforms in your political campaigns. The IEC is actually doing great work on that. They've started, we had a session with political parties across the board a couple of weeks ago where we were taking them through the various policies that platforms have. And thirdly, it's also about security, safeguarding your own campaigns, your own political players. You find that political parties or representatives of particular parties and campaigns become victims of phishing scams because there will always be bad actors out there. We need to work with political parties, politicians, to say, how can we help you to safeguard your profiles? And I think the CEO of FPP actually spoke about something that they want to have in Cape Town, targeting female members of Parliament. It would be great if we can extend that to everyone in Parliament, where we take them through the various security mechanisms that are there so that you can safeguard your campaigns, because everyone will have digital campaigns. So if you have digital campaigns, how do you safeguard your pages so that they are not hacked, there are no bad actors who can access them? And also, how do you protect yourself from phishing from phishing scams. So I think as platforms, we would be more than willing to collaborate and partner on those because we need to get everyone on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abongile. Yes, indeed. Tomorrow then you will then share and enlighten. Oh.
Is my hand not up?
Oh, my apologies. I didn't see you, honorable member. You can continue. You can continue, honorable member.
Yeah, with respect, Chair. Yeah, I'm sorry for that if I was not noted. I normally don't misbehave when I'm late. Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think there's just a few things that I think I need to comment on. Firstly, with the IEC, Ntate Mosere. Yes. There was this big issue, the Tloko story about the registration in the houses and so on. I hope it's not coming back in these national elections because I think it's a continuous process. Obviously, there's new settlements and so on. Because South African political landscape is quite different. It's not dominated by political parties per se, but it's dominated by NGOs who normally act on behalf of the unseen players. So if you have 340 registered political parties, my fear or my challenge is we need to move with speed to finding a solution to this misinformation. Because if you have many parties, it means you have many views and many parties will play around the online platform, obviously. So for me, even if it's not legislative, but I don't know this collaboration that we're speaking about, if we can strengthen it in terms of, even in terms of police, because I'm worried that IEC will not sleep because there will be complaints every day, especially when parties are so many. It does not even include the independent candidates. So our challenge as this symposium is quite much bigger, in my view. And then the other issue that I hope it will not be regarded as being political, because most of the people that are spreading misinformation is us, I'm told, as politicians. But if you take the Elon Musk story that was presented earlier today, it tells you a story about not just the platform, but beyond the platform, the owners of these platforms and their interest. That's why I'm still not convinced that beyond this election, not just 2024, beyond this election, we should find a way of going back into the law, because that's the only way we can manage. Some were saying over-regulation, but they are not saying contrary. How do we also manage other interests that are politically but hidden? Because, for instance, business has got interest in politics, but it's not in the political arena. It's an unseen hand, but it's there, and it's got a lot of influence. So if we don't tighten our belt in terms of regulations and law, still we'll fall prey somehow. Now, I think IEC has been doing quite a good work throughout the last 3 decades. But I'm worried that you're not extending your wings. I heard you spoke about your contribution in Africa. Because some of the things that happens in Africa ultimately are going to come down to us, South Africa. Whether it's not, we may remain a peaceful country, we have respect for our institutions, but if you don't spread what we have to other African countries, because I think the geopolitics are catching up with us, whether we like it, the West Sahara region, I know SADC is attending to that, but my view would be, and encourage you, IC, to go beyond where you have left. It's very, very important. Otherwise, the same challenges are going to come back to us. And maybe the last point is on FPB, because I spoke a lot about the IEC. I think the Ackerman story is a very good story to tell. And I know you're going to talk resources. But there's an important point that was raised by Honorable Mdakani. Some of us who live in rural areas, before I came to Parliament, at some point I was a teacher. There was a case of family and uncles that are raping kids in their families, and they are providing that family with food, everything. The family depends on them. In those cases, even police are unable to finalize and investigate them, because the victim is unable just to open a case, because it's a family thing. That child can go to the police station because everybody in the family agrees, no, this must not go up. Now, in terms of your education, for me, that's very, very important. That you should go to those villages. I think I just emphasize on that because I've seen it myself in deep rural areas. It's happening. And until we do that, we'll help our society. But I think so far, my comment on you would be, how do you integrate those few acts that you have amended so that it covers beyond just what the FPB is doing? For instance, even if it's in a collaborative way, or strengthen what you have now. Because what you have is about, for instance, the hate speech. Let's give a hate speech as an example. It's always something that we debate. Somebody can do a hate speech, but does not have impact. And the other one came, because it depends on, if it's a radio, it depends on the listeners. If it's a television, it depends on the viewers. If that channel has more viewers, obviously, if you make a hate speech, there will be a lot of people who listen. But if it's somebody who's not that influential, he might not be detected easily. So I'm saying I don't know how we can balance the two, but we need to extend. I'm still maintaining that we must go beyond police. In my own view, colleagues might not agree with me, but I think in a long term, not just to work on the 2024 elections. Every time there's election, we sit around and say, how do we deal with misinformation? Then after election, what? We're still standing with the same. Experience that we had for the last 3 decades should teach us that the upcoming 5-year term must work on something that will not be as general as we are doing now. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mulala, for those observations. So we will need to break for lunch because if we don't, then it will be supper soon. So, but I will request my panelists to briefly talk to the issue that has been raised. Wherein you still need certain information, please indicate so if you need to go and get certain information. But in the main, there was an issue about the sanction, our awareness level of complaints that are being received by the FPB, and the issue of the takedown notices, including how we're dealing with issues of pornography, more especially in the rural areas. And from the IEC side, I think there was an issue about how do we ensure that the independent Electoral Commission staff members are independent, if I can just rephrase it like that, or are seen or perceived to be independent. And there were also issues relating to intimidation, as well as your involvement in the African Union in terms of the process that you are then spearheading insofar as the code is concerned. Let me start with the FPB briefly. You have 3 minutes, maximum 5. Thank you. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Program Director, and the colleagues for the question. I think what has been emphasized, and I think still the same point that I want to make, is that we need a multi-stakeholder collaboration. No one can deal with these matters alone. Requires us as regulators. I see now you're going to be our partner in the build-up to the elections, because see, one of the things that we need to do is around what you call semantic narratives to ensure that the elections are not undermined. I mean, one of the things that you're likely going to see, which as the FPP have been doing on semantic analysis, someone will just post a picture to say this station is on fire, thereby making sure that people don't go to that. So I think that semantic analysis is very critical, and I think our partnership, even on public education, is quite key. Thereafter, from here, I think whatever engagement that you have, especially with industry, feel free to invite us. Because we work with them, they know where we work in the interest of the country, we work together, but where do we need carrot and stick approach, we come in as well. Regarding the issue of the fines, Honorable Majosi, I think we rely, that's why we are appealing to you to say, as the legislature, please help us. Because if you go to Elon Musk and say what is 150,000, it's nothing to him. I mean, he runs Twitter and he thrives on that. Actually, Twitter thrives on that. And for him, that's how he makes his money. So 150 is nothing. But for us to deal with the public education is quite key. I think that's the message also. Regarding the number of complaints, unfortunately, because remember the law came into effect last year, and then we've been developing what you call public complaints, which we released for finally, I think, first quarter of this financial year. It's only now that we are raising awareness around them so that South Africans can know what are their rights in terms of the online spaces. So, and together with the peer-to-peer review on video sharing, I think those things will help us to ensure that the public are aware. They were not aware. We are going to partner a lot with all this, the industry players, to make sure that South Africans are aware of that. And maybe through the elections, the more we raise awareness, the more they know that indeed they can lodge complaints. That's how it is. And then regarding engagement with the rural societies, the FPB has got 3 regional offices, like you said, inevitably due to the resources that we had. Limpopo is servicing Mpumalanga, and then Gauteng, which is the big one, is servicing Northwest Gauteng and Free State. And then we've got one in Durban. From there, we've got Eastern Cape and Western Cape, so we the Western Cape. So that's how we try at least to reach out. Still a lot of work to be done. We are not perfect, still a lot of work to be done. But I think that's what we try to do to ensure that we engage. But also, the forum that we have just established amongst the three regulators mainly, ICASA, FPB and DOTZEPNA, on public education. We've been together wherever we go to ensure that public are aware within the context of our own mandate. But I think bringing in the operators has helped us a lot in terms of driving the message home. We hope to continue in this regard. I think the message around engaging the rural leadership is very critical for us to go to ensure that the message reaches home. And also, which is another area, partnering the SABC on the radio platform, because radio is still the most powerful platform that we have to do. But in the build-up to elections, I think we are going to work quite closely with the IEC, because at the end of the day, South Africans want to know that the elections are credible, free from disinformation and misinformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, moderator. I think Mr. Monari should be comforted that in the work we did recently in research, the subjects of that research, which were young people, said to us, we still trust the television and radio more than what we see on social media. And given your earlier statement that let's reharness the institution in SABC and other broadcasters, I think it's imperative for the country that people pick up all these things in social media, but they wait for your authentication of what they've picked up, in a sense, and verification. And when we deal with disinformation on our space, that's why we run to you and we say, hey, give us space to clear this and clear this issue. So it's that collaborative support that has been proposed here that I share that. Now, Honorable Majosi, you know, any constitution of any country you look at and the electoral system, you must know that what you read and see there is a resemblance of the country's political history. And what you see in our constitution in 1D around elections is everything to do with our political history. We come from a history of segregation, exclusivity, and the list is long. And what we then wrote in 1D as a country is an inclusive framework for elections, a multi-party democracy. And in the Bill of Rights, we wrote a whole list of political rights that wanted to ensure that there's no exclusive club wherever, as long as that constitution remains like that. Now, we've got to deal with that. If you say, we've got to find a way to limit. I didn't want to scare you and say, in actual fact, our register is divided into two. There's a register for political parties registered to contest elections at a national level and provincial level. There's another register that we have of political parties who contest municipalities and by-election. That register has 240 unique political parties who are not party to the other 340. So if you're talking total registered parties in this country is 580. So 600 we'll do before this election because we're registering somewhere between 10 and 15 political parties a month. So it's an ongoing enterprise. Now, let me deal with one case that was raised, that if there's posting about any one person on various platforms, it cannot be removed. I think probably the case was not explained in its fullest. There's a case of President Zuma and the DA. And I'm trying to recall the year, but I think it's a 2019 case. It went up to the Constitutional Court. It said, which is what Ms. Mashele talked about, political speech. As a politician, you must expect that people in the quest of votes will say things about you that you are uncomfortable with. That's what the case said. So it's not that when something bad about you is posted cannot be taken down. It can be taken down. For instance, what Honorable Majosi shared, that if you are posted there naked and other, that can be taken down. But when they deal about your political role and political activism, you can't really ask for it to be taken down. You are in a competition, so be ready for competition. Now, on our staff, Chair, I start by saying the people who work for the Electoral Commission are not apolitical individuals. They understand politics very well. They are registered to vote, and they vote, which means they have a choice of their party. And you can't go out in South Africa to go find a neutral person who is nothing. That person doesn't exist. So what we need to be talking about in our democracy, how do we ensure the impartiality of those entrusted with the responsibility? We will do our part as the institution, but as political parties, you need to do your part. Your part, you best do it with informing yourselves about the electoral process and making sure there's party agents at the voting station who also know what must happen there. Because sometimes you get party agents who have no clue out there. In fact, the 3 or 4 convictions we have in this country of electoral staff was the work of the party agents. Now, space of intimidation is also, when you call it sophisticated intimidation, others call it subtle intimidation. The key there in politics is coercion. Because you are a party, you can provide blankets, food, and other forms of coercion. It becomes a problem during campaigns, and the country has not been ready to regulate that space. When can you do this as a form of campaigning? But indeed, where there's poverty and poor people, food plays a critical part in coercing you to vote differently. So those are things that as a country we still need to worry about. The Tlokwe case, Honorable Mulala, is an ongoing matter. We've worked on it. You'll be glad to know that it's only 900,000 individuals on our 26 million voters roll who do not have addresses on the voters roll. And with the changes in law, we can now collect an address from that person on the day they present themselves to vote. We'll allow them to vote, collect the address, and confirm that they are registered in the correct voting station. It will not affect this election because this is a provincial election. It's a national election. In any case, wherever you find yourself in a national election, you are entitled to vote. And so are our overseas voters who are able to vote for the national ballot. Now, my last point is I didn't touch on foreign instigated disinformation and misinformation. As a global player being South Africa and the lie of the global politics, we can never underestimate the initiatives of various foreign players to undermine our electoral process. And there we do work with our intelligence, we do work with various security structures to ensure that the country's democracy remains protected. And whether we do that with our own security systems, in as far as candidate nomination, in as far as results, in as far as protecting the voters' roll, but that threat always exists. I heard somebody talk about artificial intelligence. The problem with it sometimes is that it says to you, I'm hacking you from Russia when the person is sitting in Hatfield. Thank you.
Let's appreciate our presenters as they go down. We are going to have lunch now. I understand it is on the first floor, and we will request that the honorable members should leave this hall first, and all of us should then follow them. So when we come back, we will come back here at 15:25. 15:25. So we will then proceed with the presentation from NAB and SOS. Thank you very much. Enjoy your food. Bon appetit.